I thought I was just cleaning my garage that afternoon, but what my nephew said next changed the way I understood family, trust, and my own quiet strength forever. Before the story begins, comment the city you're watching from and subscribe to the channel for more real life stories like this. That afternoon started like so many others, slow and uneventful, with me sitting on an old folding chair in my cluttered garage, sorting through boxes I had ignored for months. Dust floated lazily in the warm light pouring through the open door, and the faint smell of oil and old wood wrapped around me like a memory I couldn't quite place. I've always found comfort in the garage, a place where unfinished projects and forgotten things coexist without judgment. I am in my early 50s, and these days I feel the weight of that number more than I used to, especially when it comes to family. Since my sister's divorce, I've naturally become more present in her life and in her son's, though I never thought much about it. He's 21 now, tall, a bit reserved, with the polite manners of someone who listens more than he speaks. I've watched him grow from a lively child into a quiet young man, but I'd never really looked past the surface. To me, he was still the kid who visited during holidays and helped awkwardly with chores. That changed when I heard the garage door open behind me. I expected my sister maybe coming to borrow something she'd forget to return later, but instead it was her son standing there, gently closing the door as if he wanted the world outside to stay out. His smile was soft but uncertain, and something about his posture made my attention sharpen. He asked if I had a minute, his voice carrying a seriousness I wasn't used to hearing from him. I motioned for him to come in, brushing the dust from my hands, suddenly aware that this was not a casual visit. He sat down slowly, leaning forward with his hands clasped, staring at the concrete floor like it held answers. I asked if everything was okay, keeping my voice light, though a familiar instinct told me something heavy was coming. After raising children of my own, I've learned to recognize quiet distress. He took a deep breath and said he didn't know who else to talk to. In that moment, the garage felt smaller, quieter, as if it leaned in with me. I told him I was there and that he didn't have to rush. When he finally looked up, his eyes held something deeper than fear, an exhaustion that comes from carrying unspoken thoughts for too long. He confessed that he felt lost, pressured to know his future when he barely understood himself, and that people listened only long enough to brush his worries aside. What surprised me most was when he said I seemed like someone who understood. Hearing that stirred a mix of pride and regret inside me, because I realized how often I had offered reassurance without truly listening. I moved closer, telling him that feeling lost in your 20s is more common than people admit. He said he felt safe talking to me about things he couldn't say elsewhere, and I let him speak without interruption. He talked about choosing a practical path over a meaningful one, about feeling behind compared to others, and about the quiet fear that he was disappointing everyone. I rested my hand on his arm and told him he wasn't disappointing me at all, that finding your way takes time no one ever wants to acknowledge. As the sunlight stretched across the floor, we sat in silence that felt steady, not uncomfortable. I didn't yet know what else he was holding back, but I sensed that what he shared that day was only the beginning, and that whatever came next would change both of us in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Later that evening, long after he had left, his words stayed with me in a way that surprised me. Even as I went through familiar routines, making dinner, rinsing dishes, folding laundry, his expression kept resurfacing in my mind like an unfinished sentence. I had always been fond of him, but now that fondness carried weight. It reminded me of myself at that age, quietly uncertain, trying to appear confident while feeling anything but. That night, sleep came slowly. I kept wondering if he had told me everything, or if there was something deeper he wasn't yet ready to face. I woke early the next morning before the house fully stirred, the kind of quiet hour that feels honest and unguarded. A pale strip of light slid through the kitchen blinds, touching the table where he once sat as a child, coloring strange little drawings I never quite understood. I stood with a cup of coffee in my hands, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, and I knew in my bones that our conversation wasn't finished. By midday, I was outside in the backyard, sweeping fallen leaves from the patio, letting the rhythm of the broom steady my thoughts. Autumn had started to announce itself, dry air, soft wind, the scent of trees and soil mixing together. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I heard footsteps behind me, I turned slowly. It was him again. He stood a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, calmer than the day before, but still carrying that same quiet heaviness. I smiled and asked if everything was all right, keeping my tone casual. He asked if we could sit for a bit, gesturing toward the wooden bench under the old tree. When we sat down, the bench creaked softly, and the leaves above us rustled like whispered conversation. I waited, letting him speak when he was ready. He admitted that there was more he hadn't shared, that school and the future were only part of what troubled him. I told him he didn't need to rush, that there was no clock on honesty. He leaned forward, breathing carefully, and said he felt like the person he showed the world didn't match who he really was inside. He described the exhaustion of trying to meet expectations he wasn't sure he agreed with, of pretending confidence while quietly unraveling. I listened, resisting the urge to fill the space with advice. Instead, I told him that many people feel that disconnect and spend years pretending it isn't there. Admitting it, I said, took courage. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said he didn't know who else he trusted enough to say these things out loud. That trust settled heavily but gently in my chest. I told him he wasn't broken or strange, just growing into himself in a world that rushes people before they're ready. We sat there longer than either of us noticed, the silence comfortable, thoughtful. Before he left, he said there was still more he wanted to tell me, but he wasn't sure if he was ready yet. I told him I would be right there whenever he decided he was. Watching him walk away, I realized this wasn't just about him finding clarity. It was about me learning to truly listen, not as an aunt offering quick comfort, but as someone willing to sit with uncertainty without trying to fix it. The days that followed were filled with ordinary moments. Yet his words drifted back to me at unexpected times. While unlocking my car, while standing in line at the store, while folding towels fresh from the dryer, there was something fragile and unfinished in what he had shared, like a door left slightly open. I wondered how long he had been carrying those thoughts alone. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a blanket pulled over my legs and the television murmuring in the background, my phone buzzed. Seeing his name on the screen felt strangely inevitable, as though some part of me had been waiting. When I answered, his voice was soft and careful. He asked if he could come by because he felt ready to talk a little more. I told him yes, without hesitation. By the time he arrived, the sky had deepened into a quiet blue, the kind that makes everything feel slower and more honest. He stepped inside gently, as if trying not to disturb the house. I offered him tea, and we sat across from each other at the small round table that had witnessed years of family conversations, both loud and quiet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He cradled the cup in his hands, using its warmth like an anchor. When he finally began, he said he had been thinking about what he told me before, about feeling disconnected from himself. He explained that for as long as he could remember, people had mapped out who he was supposed to be, and he had tried to follow those directions without questioning them. But lately he felt like he was losing himself in the process. His eyes drifted toward the window as if the words were easier to say without being seen. I reminded him gently that discovering who you are is not a failure, even though it often feels like one. He admitted he feared being judged or dismissed, afraid that speaking honestly would make him seem ungrateful or dramatic. I told him truth without cruelty only looks disruptive to people who are uncomfortable with reflection. That earned a small, uncertain smile. He said he remembered how, when he was younger, I never forced him to speak or pretend, how I always met him where he was. Hearing that stirred a quiet ache of responsibility inside me. I hadn't realized how deeply those small moments had mattered to him. The clock ticked softly as he took another breath and said there was still something he was struggling to name, something that lived just beneath the surface of all his worries. I didn't push him. I simply told him he didn't have to uncover everything in one night. He said he felt like he was standing at the edge of a new beginning without knowing how to step forward. I told him that uncertainty doesn't mean danger, it often means growth. As the evening stretched on, I sensed that his trust wasn't just about confession. It was about learning to believe that his feelings were worth space. Before he left, there was a calm about him that hadn't been there before, like someone who finally allowed himself to exhale. I knew then that the hardest part of his truth was still ahead, and that when he finally spoke it, it would reshape not only his future, but my understanding of the role I still played in his life. We sat quietly for several minutes after he finished speaking, the kitchen wrapped in a stillness that felt almost protective. His tea had gone untouched, the steam long faded, yet he kept his hands around the cup as if letting go might send his courage spilling away. I gently reminded him that he had mentioned there was more on his mind, leaving the choice in his hands. He nodded slowly, eyes focused on the table rather than my face. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, soft and persistent, like a reminder that time was moving even if we weren't. He began by saying that his struggle wasn't just about expectations or fear, but about the shape he wanted his life to take. For as long as he could remember, he explained, he had felt different from the image others held of him. Not rebellious, not angry, just quietly misaligned. He spoke about wanting a life that allowed him to move at his own pace, to value thoughtfulness and creativity instead of constant competition. He said he was tired of chasing achievements that didn't feel true just to meet an invisible standard. What cut the deepest was when he said he trusted me because I had always seen him without insisting he become someone else. Those words settled into me with unexpected weight. At my age, you begin to understand how rare it is to feel truly seen. I told him he wasn't wrong for wanting a life that felt authentic, that many people don't ask themselves those questions until much later, if at all. I shared a piece of my own history, admitting how much of my younger years were spent trying to meet everyone else's expectations, only to realize I had misplaced myself along the way. Finding my way back had taken years, and hearing his honesty made me wish someone had told me sooner that it was okay to pause and question. His shoulders eased as I spoke, relief visible in the way he sat back slightly. He said he wasn't sure if anyone else would understand him the way I did. I told him understanding doesn't require having the same answers, only the willingness to listen without judgment. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, filling the pauses between our words. He looked around the room then, absorbing the familiar details, and I could see him grounding himself in the moment. There was a quiet shift in him, subtle but real, like someone stepping out of a long shadow. He didn't say everything that night, but I sensed he was preparing to. Before leaving, he thanked me with a sincerity that caught me off guard, and as the door closed behind him, I realized that the most meaningful conversations aren't loud or dramatic. They're built slowly, with patience and trust. I felt certain that the final piece of what he was carrying would come soon, and when it did, it would mark a turning point neither of us could ignore. When he came over a few days later, I sensed immediately that this visit was different. There was a steadiness in his movements, not confidence exactly, but resolve. We sat in the living room this time, The evening, quiet and familiar, the kind of silence that no longer feels awkward once trust has taken root. For a moment, he simply breathed, as if grounding himself before speaking. Then he said that everything he had shared so far circled around one truth he had been afraid to say out loud. He told me that for years he had been living according to an image that never felt like his own, shaping himself around expectations that left him drained and disconnected. He said he didn't yet have a perfect label or a clear plan, only the growing certainty that the life scripted for him wasn't the one he wanted to continue living. What he needed most, he explained, wasn't approval or direction, but permission to explore without being pushed back into a mold. As he spoke, I realized this was the heart of his confession, not a single dramatic revelation, but the courage to claim his right to become himself on his own terms. I told him that understanding who you are is not something you rush or finish. It's something you practice, one honest step at a time. I reminded him that uncertainty is not the opposite of strength. It's often proof that you're paying attention. He listened closely, and for the first time since these conversations began, his expression softened into something lighter, like someone finally laying down a heavy bag they didn't realize they had been carrying. He thanked me not for fixing anything, but for staying present, for not interrupting him with fear or agendas. In that moment, I understood that my role was never to guide his life, only to be a safe place while he learned to trust himself. When he left that night, I didn't feel worried about him. I felt hopeful, not because he suddenly had answers, but because he had clarity about his right to search for them. Long after the door closed, I sat with the quiet and reflected on how easy it is to overlook the inner lives of people we think we know. Sometimes the most important gift you can give isn't advice, but patience. The simple act of witnessing someone as they step into their truth. That afternoon in the garage had started as nothing more than another ordinary day, but it ended up reminding me that purpose doesn't belong only to the young or the lost. It belongs to anyone willing to listen, to learn, and to walk alongside someone without trying to lead them. And in helping him begin his journey, I found a deeper understanding of my own.